Right, so now for my workflow side of things, my workflow video. So basically what I was saying to him in the last video is really that the form depends on the workflow to change its state, and in that way the view is then updated of the form, and so we continue through the process. So I'm going to show you how that works. What I have here is some of my steps through the workflow. So I said to you that we were going to create a dynamic workflow that could be reused over and over, and how I needed to do this was actually to make sure that my workflow was reading in from an XML, reading in from an external source that can be manipulated every time, so we can create new workflows. So in my steps.xml, which I have here, it defines all the steps of the workflow, and I've created small activities in here that my workflow would be able to execute. So if I run you through each one of these steps here, the first step here is it expects an initial state. So when the initial state is equal to originator complete, so once the form has been updated, the form then sets that state to originator complete, and so the workflow is executed. It comes in here, and it goes into the first state here, which is the reviewing state. What happens then is that it executes all of these steps. So it says send an email, and set the state, the next state, and then notify, which is a reminders workflow, and it takes a number of parameters. So when to send a reminder 23 hours after the initial date, and send an email to these people. So I'm going to run through that workflow quickly and how that actually works. So in the initialization state, it executes a number of it executes the whole step within. So if I go in here, you'll see that there's my execute code, and what it's actually doing is it's reading in that XML over here, and first of all it's setting the settings, but you'll see here execute step, and what happens when I go through to that execute step, we're actually executing the parts of that particular step. So in the case of sending an email, the step wants us to send an email, right, and it goes and extracts all the parameters of those emails, and then at the end here sends the email for us. So in that way we've actually created a mini workflow within a workflow, and the way that works basically is that it's reading all its workflow steps from the XML. So the next thing it needs to do is perhaps set state. So what I've used set state for is the workflow needs to set a new state, so such that the form can open and read that set state and know which view of the form to display. So if I go back to my form quickly, you'll see here, let's just check that. So the set state is originator manager pending, so it knows that it needs to create or set the view to originator manager pending. So it's reset the state, and if you have a look over here, it resets this state over here. So sorry, the workflow status to originator manager pending. The form then comes in and reads that, and depending on that displays a view here. So it updates the state, therefore the form can create or can show the correct view. It then has another parameter which is next state. Next state is the state which the workflow will actually react on. So the workflow expects that the next state will be originator manager complete, and will only act when that happens, and you'll see that here. Once we've reviewed the form state and executed the state, it moves into a process where it is pending. Go into pending, just log that that's pending, and on the workflow item changed, it checks whether the next state has been set. So it is checking whether this form status column, so therefore our status column, which is shown over here, originator complete, is it equal to the next state? Because if it is, then we need to move on and start reviewing the next step of the workflow. So then it goes back in here and it executes the next step, and the next step is obviously read from the steps.xml. In the case that it isn't, it just pauses and exits and waits for that particular next state to be implemented by the form. So the form is going to come along over here, which I've shown you previously. When you save the changes, go to rules, we set the new state to originator manager complete. The workflow then checks that and says, hey, I know which state that is, let me go and find it. So what it does is it finds originator manager complete and says, right, initial state, originator manager complete, this is what I need to do for this step, and so on and so forth. So it moves through this whole process right through here, as I have multiple steps in my approval, till it gets to the end here, where the last state is defined by completed, and if the state is equal to complete, see here, I'm sorry, the wrong one. So it checks it, sets a new state and says if the next state is equal to, if the next state is equal to workflow completed state, then go into the completed state. So that's how the workflow actually ends. So just to run you through that process again, we review the form state, that's where we execute the step. We then go in and set a new state, which is what is shown here. So we set it to the new state, which may be originator manager pending. Once we've set that new state, the form is then opened again. Well, before that happens, we move into a state of pending, and this is where the workflow waits for the user to open the form, reopens the form, he manipulates that form state, the workflow then goes and checks to see if that is the correct form state that it is expecting, and it knows which one it's expecting by the next state, so it waits for the next state to occur. Once that next state has been implemented by the form, the initial state is then executed, the next step is then implemented, and the next state is actually executed using the steps.xml. I hope that has made sense to you. If you do have any issues or any problems with that, I'd be more than happy to help you out on this one, and I'd really be keen to hear some of your ideas around it. Thank you very much.